Thank you very much. Again, I formally and officially welcome you to this event. Indeed, it is a historic event. A historic event because for the first time, we can collectively, in masses, in large numbers, as Syrian Americans and those who love freedom and justice can organize for the support of freedom and democracy in Syria. As Americans, and Syrian Americans in particular, we have witnessed with great pain the escalating brutality by which the Syrian regime has responded to the Syrian people protesting to demand freedom, justice, and dignity after over 40 years of authoritarian and repressive rule. Since March 15th of this year, when the first peaceful protest started, over 1,000 people have been killed, thousands wounded, and over 10,000 detained and tortured by the Syrian regime's security and military forces. Syrian Americans from all over the US started organizing in order to support the legitimate demands of the Syrian people for freedom, justice, and dignity. The Syrian American Council, SAC, with many other activists and organizations around the world and around the country, helped bring together Syrian Americans representing the rich diversity of Syria, Muslims and Christians, Sunnis, Alawis, Druze, secular and religious, Arabs and Kurds, political and actually mostly apolitical, young and old, doctors, professionals, business people, students and housewives, all came together as Americans, actually as human beings who care about human rights and democracy, to challenge the brutality of the Syrian dictatorship and support the legitimate rights and demands of the Syrian people. The Syrian uprising and revolution for freedom is part of the ongoing Arab Spring that is infusing desperately needed and long missing freedoms in the Arab world, and which President Obama best described in his recent speech this past Thursday, when he said, quoting President Obama, "We face a historic opportunity. We have the chance to show that America values the dignity of the street vendor in Tunisia more than the raw power of the dictator. There must be no doubt that the United States of America welcomes change that advances self-determination and opportunity." He continued to say, "The United States opposes the use of violence and repression against the people of the region. The United States supports a set of universal rights, and these rights include free speech, the freedom of peaceful assembly, the freedom of religion, equality for men and women under the rule of law, and the right to choose your own leaders, whether you live in Baghdad or Damascus or Sana'a or Tehran." And he continued to say, "And we support political and economic reform in the Middle East and North Africa that can meet the legitimate aspirations of ordinary people throughout the region. Our support for these principles is not a secondary interest. Today," he said, "I want to make it clear that this is a top priority that must be translated into concrete actions and supported by all those diplomatic, economic, and strategic tools at our disposal." End of quote from the President. We as Americans, as well as our country, as represented by our government, have a positive role to play to let the people of Syria and the Arab world know that America will stand by the rights of all people to liberty and justice. It is our responsibility as Americans, and especially as Syrian Americans, to guide our government to take that stance and reflect it in the form of tangible political, diplomatic, and economic actions. Our meeting today, through the speakers and discussions, hopes to make the case and mobilize the efforts for it to support democracy and economic and freedom in Syria. This historic Freedom for Syria Day will show that Syrian Americans will stand by their brothers and sisters in Syria and to support their demands for freedom. We have a great program today and many speakers, but more importantly, you are the most important part of that meeting today. Because after this meeting, we hope to conclude with action items that makes each one of us able to be part of that freedom and democracy.